world. I'm John Batchelor with Malcolm Hoenlein, my colleague and co-host, and we welcome Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of UN Watch, which is an NGO, human rights, Geneva, Switzerland. UNRWA. Hillel, I go to the website for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. That is an official website. Keep UNRWA working on big white letters. Donate to UNRWA. What was UNRWA conceived to be? What is it now? Good evening to you, Hillel.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Look, UNRWA began with noble intentions. The United States was actually one of its chief sponsors in the wake of the Israel's War of Independence, when the Arabs in what was then British Mandatory Palestine rejected a Jewish state in any part of the territory. They rejected the UN resolution that proposed to divide the land to a Jewish and Arab state. So the Arabs in the land rejected it, and the Arab states went to war against Israel. And the result of that war, which they openly proclaimed jihad and said they were going to throw the Jews into the sea, the Arabs lost the war. They managed to kill 1% of Israel's population, about 6,000 Jews, but they lost the war, and hundreds of thousands fled to nearby Arab countries such as Lebanon, Jordan, and the like. And UNRWA was created by the United States and some other countries with the intention of helping these refugees. After a few years, as documented in a terrific book by Dr. Einat Wilf and Adi Schwartz called The War of Return, after a few years, the Americans realized that the project was failing. They actually brought in a gentleman who had headed the Tennessee Valley Authority and had remarkable success in development for millions of people. And he realized that the Palestinian Arabs, who were the beneficiaries of UNRWA largesse, were refusing to resettle, meaning if they were in Lebanon or Jordan and they were offered works projects that they would build a new home in a neighboring country, they refused to recognize that they lost the war and that the Jewish state was a fact. And so they said, no, we are not going to accept resettlement. We're going to go back and dismantle Israel. And America wanted to stop funding it. And the Arab states told the Western countries, this is sort of late 1950s, if you don't fund UNRWA, we are going to punish you. We're not going to give you oil, and we're going to punish you. It's your fault. You're the ones who supported Israel. And so we want you paying for UNRWA. It's very important to keep in mind is that the Arab states today, like Qatar and the others, could write a check for $1.5 billion in 2 minutes and fund UNRWA. But deliberately, they want the Western states to pay for it. So to answer, UNRWA began with noble intentions to help Palestinians who are refugees in that war. They refused to allow themselves to be resettled. And they said their goal will be to return, so to speak, and dismantle Israel.
Malcolm.
And that is the perverse result that we have today, is generations of so-called refugees who refuse to move on and whose goal is to dismantle Israel.
You have been a consistent voice warning about the perversion of UNRWA's noble intent. And we've seen now that the Knesset has moved to create legislation to designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization. And even today, in the fighting, they found again an UNRWA facility in which there were rockets stored and where tunnels were leading in and out of these UNRWA facilities, schools, and others that they underwrite. What is your sense right now, in view of the legislation that is proposed? Is there a chance to change UNRWA and to stop this perpetuating the right of return narrative and fostering the anti-Israel sentiment?
Look, it's up to us. And again, it's notable that the ones paying for UNRWA deliberately are not dictatorships. It's not the Arab states. The major donors for 7 decades, and even to this day, are the Western countries. America, up until recent legislation, was paying over $300 million a year. So the Biden administration gave $1 billion to UNRWA over the last 3 years. But the Republicans pushed legislation. The Democrats agreed to it to enable funding to go through to Israel, Ukraine, and other places. So it's now signed into law by President Biden. Zero funding to UNRWA until 1 year's time, March 2025. Whoever is the next administration, they'll have to decide. But the European countries are still keen on funding UNRWA. Certainly countries like Norway and Sweden and France and many others are keen to fund UNRWA. And as you said, we have been sending them evidence. So when Guterres, the head of the Secretary General of the UN, and Philippe Lazzarini, the Swiss Commissioner General of UNRWA, when they announced in January that they were horrified horrified to learn that a dozen UNRWA staff had participated in the massacre of October 7th, in the atrocities. They were horrified. I was in Congress a few days later, and I told the House, I said, horrified? We've been submitting to UNRWA detailed warnings and reports, and I'm sure I've talked about it on the program with you folks, how UNRWA teachers and school principals and other staff routinely call to murder Jews. People like Elham Mansour of Lebanon, a teacher who said, in the name of Allah, every Muslim has to find every Israeli, every Jew, and slaughter them. This is routine of UNRWA teachers. We found them saying it on Facebook. We sent them the screenshots. We found in January a Telegram chat group involving 3,000 UNRWA teachers, 3,000 UNRWA teachers in Gaza who were celebrating the atrocities of October 7th. So when I was in Norway to meet their foreign ministry, they said to me, but it's just a few bad apples. I said, a few bad apples? Thousands in the Telegram group. When Su'ail al-Hindi, the head of the UNRWA Gaza Staff Union, was exposed for his ties to Hamas, and UNRWA had suspended him, this is in 2011, every UNRWA teacher in Gaza, 8,000 UNRWA teachers in Gaza, rallied for 3 months. They shut down 240 schools. They abandoned 220,000 students in class to rally in support of Su'ail al-Hindi, who is sitting on the Hamas Politburo together with Yahya Sinwar. The head of the UNRWA Gaza Staff Union was, up until a few years ago, what is currently a member of the Hamas Politburo. So when they say it's a few bad apples, the opposite is true. When it comes to terrorism, UNRWA is rotten to the core. And the only way we're going to stop it is if our democracies wake up. So far, America is not funding it. The UK, Switzerland, and a few other countries have not yet reinstated funding. And I hope that they help people in Gaza who do need help, but it's to liberate them from Hamas. And as you said, Malcolm, it's to liberate them from this perverse narrative of UNRWA, which tells them not to build up for the future, but to build down terror tunnels towards resentment, grievance, and future war and terrorism.
The supplies that were intercepted by Hamas coming into Gaza for months now, is that UNRWA workers pretending to be Hamas? Is that UNRWA workers who are Hamas? 30 seconds.
Yeah, look, there's outright Hamas is intercepting aid and using it, selling it onto the market. So They're generating $500 million. But we also know from UNRWA staff who've reported how their superiors have been siphoning off aid for their own use. It's documented on our website, unwatch.org.
Hillel Neuer is in Geneva, Switzerland. He's the executive director of UN Watch, a human rights NGO. Malcolm Hoenlein. I'm John Batchelor.
You're listening to CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor.